Hello and welcome to my presentation, how fixed index annuities work and how you can beat the markets with fixed index annuities without market. The information provided is for informational purposes only and is not intended to provide financial, legal, accounting, or tax advice and should not be relied upon for that regard. For proprietary and confidentiality reasons, no recordings or copies are allowed. By remaining here and continuing, you have agreed to these terms. Welcome, and thank you for your cooperation. This presentation is based on mathematical facts. Data is from the S&P 500 and on occasion the usdebtclock.org when needed, and other trusted reports and information on the internet. You decide if it is for you. Market risk. What are your odds? That's what we're looking at today. Now, I have S&P data from February 1950 to December 2014 for this presentation today. We're looking at 65 years of data. We're going to look right here at this section. Now you notice there's minuses and positives, zeros here. Zeros, minuses, and positives. In that 65 years, we had 23,706 trades. If we looked and counted all our positive and negative movements here, in that 65 years, we had 32% negative movement. 36% positive movement when we counted the positives, and when we counted the zeros, 30% of the time we were at zero. That means 1/3 of the time we were moving in a forward direction. This is extremely inefficient and self-defeating. For every move forward, there's almost as many backward and an equal amount doing absolutely nothing. That's crazy. It's kind of like trying to run up an escalator that's going down. Now, if we could look at the S&P and look at it only one time a month, mathematical exposure on a monthly basis, we do that every month on the same day. Now we only have 789 trading days in that 65 years. We're going to read it once a day, let's say on the 3rd or 8th, depending on a contract, and we're going to record the monthly reading. We also calculate the change. Now when we count the negatives, it's only 38% of the time. When we count the positives, it's 60% of the time. And the zeros are only 1% of the time. Just by looking at the S&P once per month, we now have a positive movement 2/3 of the time. Over here, I looked at the S&P once a year. Exposed once a year mathematically, 64 trades in 65 years. Now when we count the negatives that are here, that's 23% of the time. But the positives are 77% of the time. Zeros are 0% of the time. Believe it or not, now 3/4 of the time we have a positive movement. I also looked at the 1 to 5 years to find a sweet spot. At 1 year, we're at 73 to 76, but at 3 years, we're at 85. Then we go 4 and 5, it goes down from there. So the 3 years is our sweet spot. Now let's look at some strategies, 3 basic index strategies. Okay, they're simple mathematics. It's written in your contract when you buy a contract, and now you move your investments from the IRS code and investment strategies and the whims of the Congress to what's called contract law. They don't mess with that very often. First strategy we're going to look at is called the annual reset monthly sum, point to point with a cap. Sounds complicated, but let me break it down. It's really quite simple. We're going to look at the S&P 500. We're going to look at it once a month on the same date. In this example, it's the 1st of each month. We're going to write down what the S&P is at each of those days on those months for the entire year. We are then going to calculate the rate of change between those months for the entire year. We're going to apply what's called a cap. In this example, it's 2%. Anything above 2% is recorded as 2%. Anything below is recorded as is. Then we're going to take these and sum them. In this example, it comes out to 10.66. So that is our fixed index annual return with this strategy for this year. The S&P during that same time, you can see here, is 12.97%. Not bad for a zero market risk to volatility. So again, we read the S&P every month on the same day. We apply a 2% cap. Anything that's above that line, we write down or record as 2%. Then we simply sum everything up, and whatever that comes out to, in this case 10.66%, is what the insurance company will pay us in our account if we chose this strategy. Now remember, zero is our hero. You never can lose any money, either principal or gains, in a fixed index annuity due to market volatility. So we say it's zero is our hero. Anytime the strategy's total is zero or less, you simply don't get anything added to your account, but you will never have anything taken away. A 1% cap in this strategy gives you a maximum possibility that year for 12% gain. A 2% cap gives you a maximum possibility of a 24% gain. And a 3% cap gives you a maximum possibility of a 36% gain. Now let's look at another popular strategy. It's called the annual reset monthly average point-to-point with a cap. Again, we're going to take a reading on the S&P 500 the same day every month. We are going to record that reading, but in this strategy, we're going to average those readings. This comes out to 81.10. And we're going to annualize that rate of return. In this case, it comes out to 8.10%. We then apply the cap. In this case, it's 8%. And then which means we have everything up to 8%. In this case, we got the full 8% to crediting. That's what the insurance company will pay to us in our account. So the fixed index return for this year with this strategy is 8%. The return on the S&P for the same year was 12.97%. So we take the reading every month on the same day. We calculate, we average it, apply the cap, and zero is our hero again. If it's zero or less, we don't lose anything, but we protect anything that we gained. The maximum you can gain on this strategy is whatever the cap is. In this example, it's 8%. So the maximum for this year with an 8% cap that you can get is 8%. Now let's look at our third strategy, annual reset, annual point-to-point with a cap. We're still going to look at the S&P 500 because that's the index we're using. We're going to look at the same day every month. But now we are only going to record the S&P at the beginning and at the end. That's your annual point-to-point. We are then going to calculate the change, in this case 12.97%. We're going to go put our cap onto it, which is 10%, which means we get anything up to 10%. In this case, we get a crediting of 10%. This is our index return for this year with this strategy, 10%. Again, remember, the S&P at the same time made 12.97%. So, we take a reading at the beginning, we take a reading at the end, we calculate the difference and apply the cap, and zero is our hero again. We will never lose money in these strategies. The maximum you can make in this strategy is, again, the cap. Now let's look at some strategy variables. Annual reset. I've said it a couple of times. What that means is at the beginning of each year or strategy cycle, the beginning numbers are reset. So unlike the markets, you don't have to get back your losses before you can make any new gains. Imagine when you do that on the S&P. Every time you lose money, you erase that you lost it, and you just keep what you had. And you reset it, so that's the beginning for the next year. Cap rate. The cap rate is a preset limit on your possible gain for each year or cycle. Those were the cap rates we were just talking about in those three strategies. Participation rate, we did not cover, but any of these strategies can have a participation rate on them. The participation rate is the percentage of your premium you have allocated for that particular strategy. Let's say, for example, you have allocated $10,000 to the monthly average strategy that has a participation rate of 80%, which means that any gains will be based on $8,000 of the $10,000 allocation. However, that also means that a 150% participation rate on a $10,000 allocation, you would be getting gains on $15,000. So any of those strategies we just talked about, when you looked at the S&P return, that would be adjusted according to the participation rate, and then you apply the strategy. Spread rate. The spread rate is a percentage of the index change that is deducted from your gains before they are applied to your account. An example of that would be the index strategy that you select had an index gain of, let's say, 12%, and your spread on that strategy was 2%. Then the index gain would be reduced to 10% before it's applied to your account. So similar to the participation rate, in this example, the spread reduces your S&P return numbers by whatever the percentage of that spread is. In this case, it would be 2%. Bonuses and increased cap rates. A bonus or increased cap rate are used as enticements in percentage of premium given for extending your commitment to a product. Let's use an example of, you've heard of some of these annuities being 7 years long, 10 years long, 14 years long. These are your commitments to that particular contract. And let's say if you're looking at a 7-year commitment, and if you decided to go to a 10-year commitment, they'd give you an 8% bonus. Or let's say you go to a 14-year commitment, they'll give you a 10% bonus. The same can be used on your cap rates. For extended years, they will increase your cap rates for your strategies versus a shorter year contract. So this is how you can leverage or increase your potential for return by increasing the bonuses that they give you, or the cap rates that they're giving you, or a combination of both, by extending the period of time you're agreeing to stay in the contract. These strategies are only limited by the imaginations of the companies providing them and the actuaries who create them. If you have a basic understanding of these three, you can figure out most of the variations that are being used by fixed index annuity companies. Now let's look at the markets. Daily market. Let's look at the market gains versus market risk. Let's say you have a $200,000 investment like an IRA. You put it in the market, and the first year it makes 10%. So you're up to $220,000. You're pretty happy. Now the next year it goes up another 10%. You're up $242,000. Now you're really happy because that's why you're in the market, right? You want those high rates of return. But let's say on the third year it drops by 20%, and that's happened before, hasn't it? 2008, 38%. You're down to $193,000. Part of your principal's gone, and this is why you don't like being in markets. It hurts. And if the next year it goes down to 17%, you're down to $160,000. Your principal's got a big dent in it, and this does not make you happy. Now, if you happen to get up the next year by 15%, you're up to $184,000. But to get back just your principal, you need 24.5% return. That's not easy to get. And to get back the losses that you lost, you need a 50.6% rate of return for that year. This is why you don't like the markets. This is why I don't invest in the markets. You take all the market risk, And you may have management fees, commissions to pay, and capital gains on those 1099s every year if you're not in an IRA or 401k. You take all the risk. You pay all the... Now, why fixed indexed annuities? Anybody recognize this guy? Warren Buffett. His #1 rule for investing is never lose money. His #2 rule was never forget about rule #1. Does that make sense? Let's look at a risk pyramid. As you go up on a risk pyramid, the higher you go, the greater the risk. However, the higher we go, the greater the profits. Here in the middle, you have capital growth and growth in income. Right here in this section, you have stocks, mutual funds, ETFs. This is usually where your IRAs and 401ks are. Now let's look down here, income and preservation. This is where I like to operate. This is where you'll find your fixed annuities. This is also where you find your fixed indexed annuity. This is for lifetime income and getting rid of market risk. Down here a little bit further, where it's even safer, tax-free income in your life insurance policies, cash values. Now let's look at the solution to how you don't lose money in the markets. Fixed index strategies eliminate market risk with only a mathematical monthly exposure. Now let's look at that annual reset, annual point-to-point with a cap strategy we used earlier and explained on the S&P 500. Here you have an IRA, let's say for example $200,000, and in this annual point-to-point you have a 12% cap. Again, we look at our 10% gain, which is why we're in the markets, right? But this time we're not in the markets, so we're going to eliminate the risk. At the end of the year, we get up to our cap at 12%, 10% return, we get the full 10%. Now the next year we get that 10% return again in the markets. Since we're in a fixed index annuity and we can't lose money and we're protected, we look at the end of the year, we apply the strategy with a 12% cap, we get the full 10% again. We're very happy. Now the next year when that 20% hits us and the markets go down, we're not worried. Why? Because we're in an index strategy that protects us. We can't lose money. That strategy says we made 0 or a negative return, so they don't take anything away from us. 0 is our hero. We keep our $242,000. But the people in the market took a loss. Now, the next year, that minus 17% hits. Again, we're not unhappy. We applied a strategy. It says at the end of the year we didn't make any money, but they didn't take anything away. 0's our hero again, and we maintain our gains. Now, the next year, the market got that 15% return, and the people in the market were up to 184,000. We had an annual reset. It happens every year. We reset the beginning for each year by the end of the previous year. So we're starting up here again. Now that 15% return, we apply our strategy with a 12% cap. We've hit our cap at 12%. We don't get to 15, but we didn't have to make up our losses. So we have 271,000 versus 184,000. We are really happy. Now, to get our principal, for the people in the internet or the S&P 500 to get their principal back, they have to make 24.5%. But look at this. To go from the bottom of where they lost at 160 to get the gain we just had with our cap, they'd have to make a 68.7% return that year, not 15%, to equal what our fixed index annuity just returned us. We are ecstatic, extremely happy. In a fixed index annuity, we're even happier. Why? We have no market risk. No one has ever lost money in a fixed index annuity strategy based on market volatility. No management fees, no commissions. The commissions are paid by the insurance company, just like all other insurance. No annual 1099s because it's a deferred account. And because it's a deferred account, triple compounding. We get the interest on our principal. we get the interest on our gains, and we get the interest on taxes we would have paid that we no longer have to pay because of deferral. So we call that triple compounding. Oh my God, we're extremely ecstatic. 10% free withdrawals start anytime after the first year. So if you have a 7, 10, or 15-year contract because you wanted those bonus and extra cap rates, don't worry, you can still access your money after the first year up to 10% without any withdrawal charges. The withdrawal charges are if you want to move the money above your... Now, what happens if our 12% cap the next year is an 8% cap, or we started with an 8% cap? All it really does is our indexing strategy now has an 8% cap. That means instead of getting to 10%, we got 8%. But when the market was down, we also didn't lose any of our gains. We were able to keep it. So we still end up here at a $251,000 account versus a $184 account. I think I'm pretty happy. Remember, insurance company takes all the risk, and you have no fees. Let's look at a feature called a roll-up. Now, what we talked about up until now was free of any kind of fees. That protection is yours unless, of course, you did something like you want a roll-up or some added protection or guarantees. Now, what's a roll-up? Let's look at that. Here's our same scenario, the S&P taking its dive. This right here is our indexing strategy. That's what our account has. This is our cash value. Now, if you're willing to pay a small fee, I've seen them as low as 0.3 and as high as 1.25%, depending on the contract. Those you have to watch out for and look at carefully. But you want a guarantee. What if your strategy doesn't do as well? Well, we can get a roll-up. In this case, we're using a 7% guaranteed roll-up. Now, this is net of any fees. The fee for this roll-up comes out of your cash value. But it says, in this case, every single year, compounding interest, net of any fees, you're going to get a 7%. That's basically 100% of your money back in 10 years. You have no market risk. You pay a very small fee. And income you can never outlive because part of that guarantee is lifetime income. Not bad. Are we getting even more happy if we can be? Income can start anytime after the first year. Again, you buy a 14-year contract to get those bonuses and increased cap rates. Doesn't mean you can't start your income after 14 years. You can start it after the first year. No surrender charges apply on a roll-up, income, or withdrawal. Now, there's another thing called a bonus. Remember the bonuses we talked about? How do those work? Well, you put your $200,000 in. Let's say your product, either because of fees or because of extended years, gave you a 10% bonus. Well, now your cash value goes from $200 to $210 right off the bat, first day. That means your indexing now goes up on top of that 10%. How you like that? Getting even more excited, even more happy like I am? Now, your roll-up may or may not be on top of that bonus. You'd have to check your particular contract. Lifetime income for a small fee again. Now, for those of you interested in long-term lifetime income, normally when you pay a fee, you have a guarantee of a lifetime income. Now, we already talked about your indexing strategies. This is your cash value in your account. This is your walk-away money. This is actually what the value of your account is actually worth in cash because you've earned it through your indexing strategies you selected. The roll-up, however, is an income value, net of any fees. That 7% has no fees on it. When it's calculated, it's a full 7% compounding. Now some of them are at 6.5, some of them are at 8. They're different rates, so you have to look at your contract. Now, income can start anytime after the first year. So let's say we wanted to start it after the 4th year. What happens is they look at your roll-up, they look at your cash value or your indexing strategy, and they look at which is the highest, and then they'll pay you on that amount for the rest of your life. Now, depending on your age, the percentage you can take from that goes up every year. So the longer you wait, the more you can take for income for life. Sounds pretty good because it will never run out. Roll-ups can be simple interest or compounding interest. For example, let's say you're in a 10-year contract, or you have a 10-year roll-up period in a 7-year contract. Doesn't matter. A 10% simple interest will double your money in 10 years. That's equivalent to a 7.2 compounding roll-up. Both of these will double your money in 10 years. So one, for example here, $200,000 in, 10 years later, $400,000 in income. That's a pretty nice, comforting effect when you know in 10 years you've doubled your money for income, regardless of what your indexing strategy does. If it's less, you get paid on more. But if your indexing strategy is more, you get paid on the higher amount based again on your age. Now, are you jumping up and down with excitement yet? These are powerful tools. I can't believe people are not using them. Now, what's the number one retirement question? Let me help you. Will I outlive my money? That's the number one retirement question that's being asked. Let's look at this. Remember the S&P. The S&P, 1/3 of the time you're moving forward. With a 1 month exposure in a fixed indexed annuity, 2/3 of the time you're moving forward. And with an annual point to point, 3/4 of the time moving forward. Now let's look at the ABCs of risk management. ABCs of risk management. We have yellow for cash. That's our cash money. We have green for safe. That's our safe money. And we have red for risk money. That's money that's at risk. So under our yellow money, or our A of the ABCs, is our cash. What is our cash? This is normally a taxable and very liquid account. It holds at least 6 to 12 months of our total expenses. It could be your checking, your savings, money market, CDs, normally is what they are. Now over here we have our red, or our ABC, C part of ABCs, our risk money. Taxable or tax deferred, liquid or moderately liquid, unlimited gains, and unlimited loss potential. Now in the middle here we have our green, or our B money. This is our safe money. It's usually tax deferred, moderately liquid. We have a guarantee of our principal, so we can't lose any money. We have a protection of our growth, so we can't lose any of our growth. And we have guaranteed income. If it doesn't meet these three, we don't have it in our green money. Now how do we calculate our A money? Real quickly, you take your total investable asset amount. You divide it by your total expenses, your 6 or 12 months. Let's say you're using 12 months of expenses at $60,000. You have $500,000 of total investable assets. You divide your 6,000 by 5,000, that gives you 12. You make that 12%. 12% of 500,000 is 60,000. So in this case, under your cash, you would want $60,000 of your $500,000 here. Now let's jump over to our red. This used the number 100. What is that? That's your life expectancy table. It says that people die before age 100. So we use this as a rule of thumb number to start with. You take the supposed age of 100 minus your current age. If you're a couple, you can average that, or take the oldest, and you take that age and you subtract it from the number 100. So if you're age 65, or the average is 65, from 100 equals 35, we call that 35%. So 35 of 100, or $500,000, is $175,000. So at age 65, with this rule of thumb, you should not have more than $175,000 of the $500,000 in an at-risk account, money you can lose. How you calculate your green is simply the difference between those two. Remember though, you have to have guaranteed principal to be in here. You have to have protected growth to be in here. Otherwise, you can't. It doesn't count as green or safe money. Guaranteed income for life. So you take 100% minus the 12% for your cash, plus the 35% for your risk, and that leaves you with 53%, or $265,000 of the $500,000 that should be in your safe or protected money. Does that make sense? Now remember, this is a rule of thumb. You decide what your risk percentage is. Now, your B money, your principal guaranteed, growth protected, guaranteed lifetime income money, your safe money, that's what I work with. That's what this is about. Your safe money man specializes in tax-free, guaranteed lifetime income strategies. That's what I do. Another way to make my money last longer, which is your money, is how to get 1.5 to 2 times more income per account dollar in retirement. Wouldn't you like to know how to do that? Well, when we look at a Social Security gap, and that's actually you take your Social Security benefit at a particular age, have it pay off your expenses, and whatever's left is what your investments or pensions, combination of investments and pensions, have to cover. That's called your Social Security gap. Now, this example, at age 70, $5,000 a month, growing at 3% inflation at age 70, was $3,000 a month. Now, real world data from the Fidelity Investments, they did a report, and they looked at the average 401k accounts from Fidelity Investments, which is one of the largest 401k providers in the world. The average person age 55 and up had about $165,000 in their 401k account. Now, who can retire on that? Then we applied our rule of thumb 3% withdrawal rate so that you have a 50-50 chance in an investment account of lasting 20 or 30 years. That gave you $4,900 a year, or $413 a month. Well below the $3,000 we need. Very lacking. Now, in order for that account to make up that difference, at age 70, you would, at a 3% withdrawal rate, you'd need $1.2 million. That gives you $37,000 a month at 3% withdrawal to cover the $3,000 a month gap. Everybody follow me on that? So have you got there yet? Can you get that with 1/3 movement, like we were talking about earlier in the S&P? Awful difficult. Well, with the fixed index annuity and the strategies that they have, they usually let you have a higher withdrawal rate. Why? Because you have a lifetime guarantee. Even if it runs out, they continue to pay you. So now you can take out more money. That means you only have to have less money. In this example, with one product, $645,000 instead of $1.2 million gave you the same income, but this income, unlike from an investment, will last the rest of your life. Now, if you're not jumping out of your chairs and running over here to talk to me, I don't know what's going to get you motivated. No market risk and a small fee. Income for life. Another way to make my money last, or we're really talking about your money, long-term care alternative. What if you can't qualify for a long-term care policy? Or what if you don't like long-term care policies, but you feel the need to have some protection? Let's say you have a reserve asset. You don't think you'll be using it in retirement, but you don't want to give it away or use it. You want to hold it in reserve for long-term care needs. Let's say it's $100,000. Well, you take that $100,000, it becomes $200,000 or $300,000. It's 2 to 3 times whatever you put into it. Now, this is a fixed annuity, which is a long-term care benefit. No medical exams. It's all done over the telephone. But your $100,000 now, just by moving it over here, becomes 2 to 3 times that amount for long-term care benefits. Are you jumping on a roof right now? You insure your house, your car, and your life. Why not your assets? My name is Victor Lloyd Burgess. This is the end, or is it? Call me. I can help you survive.